Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today for this NOCTI Spotlight webinar. My name is Ashley. I'm the Customer Care Coordinator here at NOCTI, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. We'll be discussing the need for CTE administrators and the support and resources that are available to help them be successful. I'd like to introduce our presenters for this session, Dr. John Foster, the President and CEO of NOCTI, Dr. Clyde Hornberger, the former director of Lehigh Career and Technical Institute in Pennsylvania and current member of NOCTI's Board of Trustees, and Dr. Delmas Watkins, the CTE director of DeKalb County Schools in Georgia and a member of NOCTI's Board of Trustees. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Everyone, please welcome our presenters.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on what part of the country you happen to be in. What a great time to be involved in career and technical education. You know, there is quite an upswing in interest from students, at least from our perspective here at NOCTI, and of course with our partner at ACTE. We've also noticed that unfortunately the preparation of CTE teachers and CTE administrators both has been on somewhat of a decline. So we wanted to jump in and try to see what we could do to help that. So we're going to talk about a new resource called, as Ashley mentioned, Becoming a CTE Administrator, 10 Things to Know. And all three of the authors of that resource are going to be speaking today. And I just wanted to give you a quick idea of what discussion topics are going to include. As you can see from the screen there, we're going to have a little bit of discussion about identifying the need, why we need CTE administrators, and why there's a shortage. We're going to talk about the structure of the book a little bit and how we determine the topics. And then we're going to follow up with a discussion of how the actual chapters within the text are laid out, and then gather a little bit of feedback. So Ashley has already introduced our co-presenters, Dr. Hornberger and Dr. Watkins. And I think at this point, I'm going to move to Clyde, I believe, to talk about how we identified the need. So.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Clyde Hornberger, as John Foster said. The first slide that I'm going to talk about says, do we need this and why now? Well, if you're an educator and you're involved with your state organizations in any capacity, you can't help but notice all the announcements that there are for openings for CTE directors or superintendents. I know personally I'm getting more and more calls than ever before just looking for references throughout the year. You know, typically it used to be at the end of the year when people were announcing their retirement about 3 months before the end of the year, but it just seems this year it's been continuous, constant openings. And the need also for CTE administrators is reflective of the increase of enrollments as well. I mean, more and more we're seeing schools adding programs, and that's part of that is due to the demand for skilled workers. And fortunately, we are enjoying at this time, we're enjoying tremendous support from legislators, both at the state and federal level. They understand the need for technical workers and the impact that has on the economy. Identifying the need, national shortage, CTE leaders, method of filling other positions, and fundamental skills targeted to CTE. Now, we know that many CTE teachers begin their teaching career later in life, coming directly from business and industry. Most of those lack a four-year degree, or their degree is not in education, so they lack the professional or pre-service that most traditional educators follow. As a result, they need to take a lot of courses just to get their teacher certification. So when you connect that to the fact that, yeah, we are starting later in life because they've mastered their industry skills in technical areas, and now they've completed their teaching assignments or their certification for teaching, now they face probably a graduate degree to become a CTE administrator. So it becomes a very difficult career path or difficult decision to follow that career path. Second, many states have, to deal with this difficult shortage, they've created an alternative certification. So we find a lot of people are entering the CTE certification area or administrative area, many times they lack a lot of background in education, or they lack, certainly they may lack some CTE coursework where they didn't actually never even taught in a CTE subject. But be that as it may, we're finding people that are coming directly from the military or from business industry are filling these positions. And often states have created a very shortened or abbreviated method of certifying people. As a result, we felt that there was a need to get the word out from as practitioners to help them with some tools that will help them during their first year. So we look at the fundamentals. The three of us wrote this book, 10 Things You Need to Know in your first year of CTE. Delmas, I'm going to turn it over to you, and maybe you can tell us what's happening in Georgia.
Thank you, Clyde. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Delmas Watkins. I'm the CTE director here in the Cobb County Schools. We're on the east side of Atlanta. Just to tell you a little bit about me, I've been a CTE director in Georgia ever since 2000. I know that's been a long time. I was first a CTE director in a small school district with one high school, and now for the last 15 years, I've been working in a large school district where we have 26 high schools. And during this time in Georgia, every year when we have our administrators meeting to kind of support what Clyde was talking about the shortage, it seems like every year we have about 60% of our CTE administrators are new across the state. And that's just about every year. And that was kind of remarkable that every year we have such a high turnover. But in the state of Georgia, one of the things that the Georgia CTE director for the state does and have supported, and we have several different ones throughout the years I've been administrators, that they have three directors that support the new people around the state. And they kind of serve like the north end, the central, and the south end of the state. And these are individuals that go out and help those administrators that may not have the CTE background. So as we talk about the structures that an individual may need in order to be successful and may not have the background, I said, first of all, I think you probably just need to find a mentor. There are some veterans out there. I'm kind of known as somewhat of the guru in Georgia because several of the directors around in the districts around where I live, I've kind of mentored them. But the leader support for those new people that may not have the background, the building the structure, I think there's really like four major areas that I think you just need to focus in on. And as you see around that diagram that you see in front of you, you have several. But if you focus in on teacher development, student engagement, employer engagement, and then post-secondary connections, I think for the most part you have what you need in order to move and support CTE instruction to prepare a student. The one thing you need to know about labs, and when you talk about instructional equipment, that the labs need the proper equipment in order for the students to gain the hands-on project-based learning tasks to be able to learn those skills. Throughout my tenure, and there were, I've had quite a few superintendents, and I would have some of them say to me, well, I want to start this time of year, and they want to start a CTE program in the fall, and then once I kind of give them the parameters of lab layouts and the type of equipment and a budget that's needed, then they realize that you can't really implement a CTE program just that quickly. There's some more planning got to be involved in that. And say, for instance, around that diagram, you also see where it says courseware. Let's take, for instance, I'll give you another example of, let's say, a culinary arts program. In culinary arts, the students need, of course, you need a lab, but also you have to think about in your budget food. that's above and beyond what other CTE teachers or other academic teachers may need as it relates to instruction, and then also the process on how to purchase the food for your hands-on projects inside the lab. Instruction. It's very important that you understand and know that the instruction that's done on a day-to-day basis is very critical as students are learning the skills that employers need. One of the things that when I first, 15 years ago, when I first came to DeKalb in this large school district, the one thing that I wanted to do is to have those contacts with the teachers to understand, okay, if a student decides that they're going to be in our program, when they finish our program, what value do we add to them? So during that instruction time, we wanted to make sure that students are assessed and they leave with credentials and skill sets that will make them employable and that will bring value added to their next step beyond high school. And then a couple more things on this slide that we'll move on is we see data driven. You can use a core indicator from the Perkins. And I know we all across the country use the Perkins core indicators as our guide for those of us that receive the Perkins funds. But those core indicators they're a good guide for the most part. You know, you have the graduation rate in there, you have the credential piece, you have math, how students are doing in math and language arts. So those core indicators are good pieces that we can use to kind of guide our work. And then just one last thing, the professional learning. Can't say enough of that. Not only for the teachers, but even for us as CTE administrators, we have got to make sure that we continue to learn along with our teachers. Because as the business and the industry and the skills that's needed out there continue to change, we also need to make sure that we are changing along with that. The last thing that I'll leave with you here is to learn the language. As you connect with your teachers, many of our teachers that teach in CTE, they come from industry, so they know the language. So as we sit down and build relationships with our teachers, then we can learn the lingo and to make sure that we're, speaking apples to apples and making sure that we are speaking the same language that the industry is saying. So it's very important that, as it relates to our climate and our tools that we use, finding a mentor and using the appropriate tools to lead instruction so that we're preparing for our students for business and industry and the workforce. So Clyde, if you want to chime in to talk about some of the other tools that we may be able to mention to assist our presenter, our people that's listening today.
Well, thank you, Thomas. We, when we looked at what chapters should be in the book and what would be the most useful information to new CTE administrators, we came up with 10 different chapters. And you can see in front of you, we've listed some of the chapters. And just to highlight a few, when you think about current technical education, and as administrators, we have a very unique mission. All educators focus on student success, and we have different constituents that depend upon us over and above the students, from parents, taxpayers, etc. And in CTE, we have a dual mission that we also have to support our local employers in many different ways through workforce development and the community through providing that workforce that is so critical to economic development. And to do that, which is also very unique to us, both in federal and state legislation, we have to have a different advisory structure. At the highest possible level, we have our local advisory or general advisory, sometimes called an executive council on career and technical education. They tend to take this role very seriously with a lot of senior leaders and decision makers in the community, and they provide guidance as for strategic planning, for funding, etc., to the school leadership and the administration. And they also, then at every program, we have to have what's called an occupational advisory committee or council. And as a minimum, we have those at every cluster level. But it's not uncommon for schools to have an advisory. If they had 28 different programs or 14 programs, they'd have 14 or 28 different advisory councils. So therein lie, they become the experts, the subject matter experts for the teacher. And in the book in chapter 5, we talked about engaging employers, and we provide a list of engagement strategies and do's and don'ts, and things that you should do and do not, things you should not do, especially during your first year. But it is not uncommon for many schools to have these committees, but they're rarely utilized to the fullest extent possible. For example, sometimes schools have this enormous meeting where they'll have 500-600 employers all have dinner at night and just take a couple hours with dinner and talk to them, and then we break out into the various sessions. The problem with that is we rarely can get to all of the meetings as administrators, and a lot of times those committees depend upon us to provide some answers. So generally they get them later. A much more effective strategy would have meetings by clusters so you could have better coverage by the administrators. We also talked about the importance of the role of the administration and the role of the teacher in those advisory structures. So in chapter 8, we talk about instructional equipment analysis, and this ties very well to the advisory committees. The need to provide state-of-the-art equipment is critical to career and technical education instruction. Again, unlike many subjects, we have this heavy demand for state-of-the-art instructional equipment, which is very reflective, or it should be similar, if not exactly like the equipment found in business industry. So we talk about the director's role, and we talk about the director setting priorities for the advisory committee and to make sure that we get the type of advice we need, or the superintendent or director. We also talk about the need for the teacher to do certain things, solicit expertise from the people. And we want to make sure that when we buy equipment, that we try to buy state-of-the-art equipment and not maybe a lesser expensive equipment that may get the job done, but it's not the same exact equipment that's used in industry. When we buy state-of-the-art equipment, it allows us to do more business and industry or incumbent worker training or advanced skill up type training. If we buy the basic training, we tend to limit our ability to generate revenue that can help us resource our programs. And this comes back to the final chapter, which is chapter 10. It's called Funding Basics. As a new career and technical administrator, whether you're a superintendent or director, you are faced with typically you're hired sometime before the start of the school year, which is typically July 1st. And when you walk in the door, you look at the budget, and the budget reality is it was developed by someone who could have been 12 months or more previously. So rarely do we ever take over a system that we ended up preparing the first budget. So as a director or CTE administrator, we find we have to go a full year before we can really dig into that budget and fund our own priorities or resource the priorities that we feel are essential. So typically we inherit a budget that someone else had their priorities. If we're fortunate, those priorities are very similar or same. If not, we have to wait a full year before we can do the kind of manipulation with the funds within the system. And when you think about it, we also talk about different types of revenue, such as Perkins. We talk about state funding, such as subsidy, equipment grants, or various types of grants from different organizations. We talk about organizations, donations. We talk about student-run enterprises, and we talk about the ability to generate revenue through adult or industry training. But when we look at our budgets, we find that typically our budgets are probably 78 to 80% that are fixed costs with salaries, benefits, and facilities. And we tend to have 20%, often less than 20%, that are a program budget. And so when we tend to make cuts, sometimes in the program area, which defeats our whole purpose of having the career and technical school. So we talk about this in the chapter, and we try to give some pointers that would help new administrators make some decisions that have long-term benefits. With that, I'm going to turn it back to John, and maybe you can take us through the next couple of slides.
Yeah, thanks, Clyde. I think it's really important to highlight something that Clyde said, and you know, we all know this, but it still deserves to be highlighted, and that is the, you know, the dual mission that CTE serves. You know, when you think about the differences between a regular high school administrator and a CTE administrator, just in terms of governance, in terms of funding, in terms of curriculum, in terms of revenue, instruction, professional development, all those things are very different. They have some similar roots, but the audiences and the instructors that you are dealing with are very different than you'd find in a typical secondary setting. And I hope you got that understanding from both Delmas and Clyde. So what I want to talk about a little bit, since Clyde talked about the layout of the chapters, the 10 chapters, I want to talk about the layout of each one of the chapters. They're all laid out the same way, and on the screen in front of you, you have an idea of what they entail. First of all, there are 4 chunks, and the first one is the content. It's the you know, the nuts and bolts of what it is we're talking about, whether it's funding basics or whether it's about developing board relationships. There's, you know, content that was collaborated on by the authors. The second piece is a consolidation of that content. So it's basically a listing of key learnings, and usually there's 6 to 8 of those key learnings that are surmised from the chapter content. The third section within each chapter is something we've called notes from the field. And this is important because what we've done here is we've asked for generally 3 samples, sometimes 4 samples from administrators in the field or folks who have dealt with CTE administration. They may be state folks, they may be industry folks, but in each one of the chapters, there's 3 resources that are listed, and these are kind of little mini case studies. When you think about it, 10 chapters times 3 case studies, that's 30 case studies. And what we did very deliberately was we made sure that the book itself didn't include any more than 2 examples from any one state. So I think with this book, we ended up with somewhere in the vicinity of about 18 state examples. Some states we did use 2, some states we only used 1. But what that means to the reader, to the audience of this book, is that you'll get a compilation of experiences, for example, related to understanding funding basics, or understanding development of board relationships, what it's like to develop your first school board agenda or your joint operating committee agenda. You know, what that actually feels like from the standpoint of a new CTE administrator. So we think that section of the chapters is pretty important. And then the last part to each one of the chapters is, of course, some related content. In some cases, it looks like a bibliography. In some cases, it looks like a number of URLs which you can utilize to find additional information about each one of the chapters. So that's our layout of the chapters. And we've gotten some feedback from the field initially. We rolled this book out at Vision 2017 this past December. And since that time, we've had a number of different institutions and states and other entities, you know, involved in education, take a look at these books. And one of the things that we found that's pretty consistent, well, actually a couple of them that are listed on the screen in front of you again, the comments are that, you know, there are very few books with a CTE focus regarding administration. There are tons of administrative books out there that you can get from a number of different organizations, but there are a few of them with a CTE focus. And typically what our folks have told us from different state institutions is that the books that are available are a little bit outdated. They haven't kept up the pace of just Perkins and federal funding alone, not to mention the collaboration that's been occurring recently between the workforce investment legislation and the ESSA legislation. So in most cases, the books that do have a CTE focus are, you know, a little bit dated. And lastly, the piece that I kind of highlighted on the last slide, that there are no books with real and relevant case studies. Now, these aren't deep case studies, but they are, in some cases, musings, in other cases, real solid data about how I do this or that regarding the chapter content. And, you know, to have that from, you know, 18, 20 different states around the country is something of a resource that, you know, hasn't been put forth in the past. So if you're interested in this resource, this is something we collaborated on with CTE. And again, you can see the title, Your First Year in CTE Administration, 10 Things to Know. We're currently working on 10 additional things or 10 more things to know. Maybe one thing we didn't actually mention specifically, though we kind of alluded to it, is that this first book was geared towards folks who are kind of in the planning stages and have just kind of taken a new CTE administrative job, maybe in the first 3 to 6 months. So as Clyde alluded to, you really haven't had the chance to develop your own budget. You haven't had the chance to develop your own professional development sessions. You haven't had the chance to do a lot of things. You're kind of absorbing what's currently going on and thinking about what you might do differently or what you might be able to improve. We're going to focus on book 2 on some things that deal with actual implementations and planning of different topics that are included in the second book. So on this slide, you also see pricing from ACTE. As I mentioned, ACT is our partner on this, and they're taking care of all the ordering and obtaining the resources. I don't want to speak for ACT, but I would imagine, well, I know that if you're a state entity and you're interested in buying a larger number of these texts, you can do that at a slight discount by corresponding with ACTE. I know the state of Missouri buys these for every one of their new CTE teachers every year and distributes them with a little professional development tied to that. I also would be remiss to say that if you are interested in any sort of you know, webinar for your state or for your local, you know, we'd be happy to try to assemble something for you. We've done a number of face-to-face sessions as well, and we will be doing a session at the upcoming ACT Best Practices Conference as well as Vision 2018. Our last slide is a contact information kind of slide. You have our individual contact emails right there. You also have a phone number for NOPTI, and of course, if you are interested in the book, you can find it off the NOPTI webpage or also on ACT's online bookstore.